Hello, and welcome to another edition of Dumpster Dives. Today with me I have the Sharp Super VGA Color. Color what? Oh, it's a laptop. Okay, it's a color laptop. This is technically the PC-8800 notebook computer made by Sharp, probably in the mid-1990s. Because it's Super VGA, I'm guessing this is a Pentium processor, and well, it's got a little LCD strip here for some kind of status indicators. Floppy drive, battery over here. Looks like it's missing a hard drive and whatever the enclosure the hard drive came in. And it's missing the covers for the hard drive and these covers for the RAM expansion. Looks like it has 8 megabytes of RAM right here. Looks like it's got this backup battery that I'm just gonna pull out right now because the only thing that this can do at this point is leak all over the place and cause more damage. A couple of PCMCIA slots right here. Infrared port. Back here we have your usual serial port, parallel port, external keyboard, and of course VGA. And what's this? Docking station connector. All right. And oh, there's something I already like a lot about this laptop. It's got a very standard barrel style power connector, which means that I can plug in my universal power adapter and see if this powers on. I really like when laptops have a no-nonsense power connector as opposed to some kind of crazy proprietary power connector that's impossible to find today. And looks like we've got a sound card. So of course the most obvious concerning thing that I see is these display hinges, both of which are broken and completely broken off from the metal portion, from the metal to the plastic. You can see these screws are completely busted off. But it looks like the actual display cable in there is still intact, so this may still work. Okay, well, before I attempt any repairs on this, let's just get a baseline for whether this thing powers on at all. Because this has this nice barrel adapter, this is pretty easy to test. I have this cheapo 120 watt power adapter. I'm gonna plug this in, and what's the voltage on this? Voltage rating 21 volts. So it wants 21 volts in that power adapter, and my power supply here only does 20 volts or 22 volts, but you know what, I'll bet you that 20 volts should be enough to power this on. And besides, I'm guessing that this power adapter probably gives out slightly more than 20 volts here anyway. In fact, let's power this on and check using a meter how many volts we're actually getting out of that right now. So that's set to 20 volts, and we're getting about 20.6 volts, which I'm going to say is close enough to 21 to try to power that on. Let's lift off this display very, very gently. I don't want to cause any further damage to those display cables. And yeah, these hinges are completely loose and disconnected. So I'm just going to prop this up against the back wall here. Plug in this power connector, and here goes nothing. Nope, I see something on the LCD display here. Oh, look at this. It's powering on. I've got a BIOS post screen. Excellent. Oh, it's got a 486 DX4 processor, so not Pentium. Real-time clock failure, that's expected. Invalid configuration information. Yeah, this is all expected stuff. The display is looking pretty good, and all these adjustments seem to work. We've got nice brightness, good contrast adjustment. This is very, very encouraging. Okay, well, I don't want to do too much more with this right now before I fix the display. I'm gonna stop here right now. I'm gonna power this off. Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is focus on repairing these display hinges. So I'm going to put this display back down. Okay. So right now I'm gonna take out this main battery. Let's pull this out. And by the way, one thing I like to do when I remove old batteries from ancient laptops like this is I pry open the battery case. They're usually pretty difficult to pry apart, but this one looks like it's gonna come off pretty easily. There we go. That wasn't hard at all. Anyway, I like to take these apart and throw away these old cells because these could also leak and cause more damage. But I do like to keep the actual battery container so that I could put it back into the unit and have the look be original. And who knows, maybe in the future somebody would actually rebuild this battery with new cells and have it actually work again. Let's take these cells out. Okay. Clip off these wires, and then these old cells we can throw away. And by throw away, I mean dispose of properly. My city has a hazardous waste facility that I can take these to, and I'm sure yours does too, so make sure to not throw this in the trash, because that's very bad. There we go. So now the battery case is totally intact, and it can go back into the computer and look like nothing happened. Okay, so now let's focus on what to do with these display hinges. So they are completely shot. Well, I think I have a plan. I'm going to begin by cutting off the tops of these hinges from right about here and here. I'm going to pull these bits of plastic off. So I think I'm going to use my Dremel to cut this off. Okay, very carefully now. Okay, so how do we go about repairing the actual hinge mechanism? First of all, these hinges look like they're turned to the open position, actually. So you see, when the lid is in the closed position, these screws are actually supposed to be facing upwards. I'm going to take some pliers and actually shift that hinge back to the upward position. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to pick off any old plastic from these screws as well. I've got these screws pointing upward, which is the correct orientation for these hinges. So now I have both of the metal portions of the hinge completely exposed. So my plan is, I think I'm going to fix this using epoxy. Do you see how the bottom portion of the plastic underneath the hinge forms a perfect cup shape? So I think if I mix up some epoxy and just fill that in, and make sure to fill it over the metal portion of the hinge, I think that'll just adhere nicely and make everything stick together. I'm going to wall off any areas where I don't want the epoxy to flow into with some aluminum foil. Alright, so I hope you can see this is now a perfect cup shape where the epoxy is going to go in and I'll fill it over these screws. Let's mix up some epoxy. I have this JB Weld epoxy that I found in my house. I've used this for many other household projects in the past, and I just love it. They're not kidding when they say JB Weld. It really is as strong as a weld once it cures. And I am not sponsored by JB Weld. I just like the product very much, but if they want to sponsor me, they are very welcome to. JB Weld. Oh, a good amount. And the second portion. And mix it up really well. Okay, and actually one final thing I'm going to do is take my Dremel tool and create a few grooves along the plastic of the bottom of the hinge here, so that when I put the epoxy down, it flows into the grooves and really bonds the plastic portion to the metal portion. I'm just going to go and generously fill it in. Now, this stuff is pretty viscous, but it is going to drop and fill in some stuff on its own. Okay, so I've finished filling in the epoxy, and you can see I filled in pretty much the entire hinge portion and covered the metal post. I actually made a few more grooves at the top here and filled those in with epoxy as well, just so we get nice coverage pretty much the whole way through, so that it bonds the plastic to the metal piece there. And by the way, notice how perfectly the color of the epoxy matches the color of the laptop. That's a complete coincidence. It's a little bit more glossy than the laptop, but that's okay. I think it'll look fine in the end. Now, this epoxy is going to take upwards of 24 hours to cure completely, so I am going to set this aside for now and come back to it tomorrow. I'll see you then. Okay, it is now the following day, and it looks like the epoxy has completely hardened. So let's lift up the display and see what we've got. Oh man, this feels perfect. That's it. Look at this. The hinges are completely stiff. They're holding up the display nicely. I think that's fixed. All right, we've got a display. And again, not the prettiest job with the epoxy, but looking at it from this angle, it's barely noticeable. This is perfect. We know that the floppy drive is broken, but I don't think I'm gonna repair this right now. I think this is one of those floppy drives that uses a belt to drive it, which are a real pain to repair, so I'll leave that for another time. But we can try to boot this up from just a hard drive over the IDE port. Now, I'm not going to use an actual hard drive, and instead I'm going to use my trusty IDE to SD card converter. And based on the specs of this thing, I'm guessing it was designed to run Windows 95, so luckily I have an SD card preloaded with a Windows 95 disk image. So let's just try to boot up from this. I'm just going to pop this in here. I think this is the right orientation of it. And let's power this on again. Okay. Real-time clock failure, that's expected. Let's press F1. It does not seem to want to boot up from that disk, but let's try to get into the setup utility and make sure it detected that disk properly. Yeah, okay, that disk configuration does not look right. So let's configure it. All right, that should just about do it. So how do we exit and save? F4. Let's see if this works. And, oh, starting Windows 95. It's working. Oh, listen to that. Sound is working, Windows 95 has booted up, and we're good to go. So yeah, I was able to get Windows 95 fully installed. I found the correct display driver for this. This is a Cirrus Logic VGA, or I should say Super VGA display with 800 by 600 resolution with 256 colors. Everything runs beautifully, so this is clearly designed for Windows 95. Now, I wasn't actually able to find a lot of information about this thing on the web, which makes me think that this was just a random mid-level entry into the laptop market by Sharp sometime in the mid-90s, which obviously never really took off. I'm guessing when this was released, this must have cost around $1,500, $1,600, and this was probably intended for your average business professional on the go. This is good for office-type applications and spreadsheets and things like that. I should mention, this laptop comes with a capacitive trackpad, which I'm pretty sure was highly unusual for a laptop of that era. I mean, those types of laptops usually came with a trackball or not even any mouse at all. You have to plug in an external mouse. But this has basically a modern trackpad that we see today in laptops, which is really cool. But actually, one other thing I want to do with this is shut this down. Let's actually restart this thing and boot into MS-DOS so we can try a couple of games. Yep. So all the games I tried running run really well. It's got Sound Blaster sound. But of course the big problem is the STN display, which makes any kind of game with motion pretty hard to play. Now, I will say that this is one of the better STN displays I've seen. The response seems pretty good, but still not quite as good as it can be for gaming with a lot of motion. But yeah, everything works perfectly. So there we have it, a reasonably well restored MS-DOS era laptop, the Sharp PC-8800. Originally probably worth around $1,500, and today I would guess the plastic content is probably worth around 12 cents, and the metal content inside I'm guessing is worth around 62 cents. So there we go. I think this one's a keeper. I'm going to keep this for a while and probably resell it to a collector later on. So overall, I would give this a 6 out of 10. The biggest deduction would be for the STN display, which makes it not very usable for retro gaming. But again, I have to give credit for the nice trackpad and the fact that it has a sound card built in and PCMCIA ports, all the good stuff you would expect. So if anyone wants this thing for yourself, feel free to get in touch and we'll work something out. Now, if you'll excuse me, Kyrandia is not going to save itself. We'll see you next time.